Hello and welcome to Shalom, Jerusalem. I'm Esther Allen. My guest today is Pastor Greg Stone. Greg serves as the pastor of Jewish ministries at Gateway Church for over 25 years. He has a doctorate from the King's University in Messianic Leadership, and he loves to talk about and teach the Jewish roots of the New Testament. Pastor Greg, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm really thankful to be with you today.
You bet. Pastor Greg, I have been told that you grew up in a Jewish household and came to faith in Jesus later in life. I would love to hear a little bit about your decision to follow Jesus as Messiah.
Yeah, that's my story. I grew up in the suburbs of New York City. My rabbi was Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg, and he was the vice president of the World Jewish Council, president of the American Jewish Congress. And so I was bar mitzvahed under him and came to faith when I was 24 years old while I was in the Air Force. A home group leader from a church invited me to his church, and I was really struck by the love that I felt from the people in the room.
Wow. Well, my husband also served in the Air Force, so I want to thank you first for your service to the country. Next, I would love to talk about the Gateway Center for Israel, something that has recently launched. Of course, Gateway has a long history of loving the Jewish people and serving Israel. But I would love to hear about the Gateway Center for Israel. And in particular, there is something that grabbed my attention on the website. I'd love for you to expand on this statement. It says, "We believe in Israel's irrevocable election and affirm the calling of Jewish followers of Jesus to remain true to their identity as Jews." Could you speak to this for us?
Happy to. Well, let me begin by saying that Gateway Church is a little unusual in that we actually have two Jewish departments. So we have as it were, the Apostolic Jewish Department, which the Gateway Center for Israel is a part of, and that's led by Nick Lesmeister, and he is a Gentile with a heart to help the church love and support Israel. And then we have my department, which is the local Jewish ministries of Gateway. So it's kind of like church walls in, church walls out kind of thing. And so the Gateway Center for Israel exists to help the church be effective in loving Israel. And basically, the church, the idea is to create a situation where where pastors are fostering a situation where Jewish people can feel comfortable in their church and training pastors to succeed in building relationship with Israel and supporting Jewish people, and basically trying to replicate what is happening at Gateway. And so I lead what's at Gateway.
Pastor Greg, I would love for you to take a minute to explain to us what you do at Gateway, what your job looks like, a pastor of Jewish ministries. Unfortunately, not many churches here in the West might have that position. So tell us a little bit more of what your role and responsibility looks like.
Well, I have the privilege of we basically do three things at Gateway Church. One is we believe in Jewish evangelism. We do believe that Jewish people need Yeshua. We do believe that Yeshua, Jesus, is the Messiah for Jew and Gentile. We believe that. And so we believe in Jewish evangelism. The second thing we do is we train the church on her Jewish roots. So, and that probably takes up most of what I do because most of Gateway Church is a Gentile church. And so I'm constantly training both the staff and the people, the congregants, on what it means to be built upon the Jewish roots. So we have a monthly Jewish service, Messianic service. We have regular classes and teachings in groups, and I teach at the King's University. So we do all that kind of stuff. And then we believe in supporting the Messianic ministries around the world. That's one of the things that sets us apart from a lot of the other ministries that love Israel, but they don't really either do Jewish evangelism or support Messianic ministries. And we at Gateway believe in both.
Pastor Greg, how would you encourage church leaders out there to have a healthy view of Israel?
Well, I would start first with just praying for Jerusalem, because when you pray for something, your heart moves in that direction. And the scripture is really clear that we should be praying for the peace of Jerusalem. So I would start there, and that'll let God really work in your heart. And then I would just work at being informed. I would pray for Israel. I would encourage churches to do things like give towards Jewish ministries, evangelism. Imagine what would happen if every evangelical church or every church not only tithed of her income 10%, but beyond that, gave a tithe of their tithe to some kind of Jewish ministry. Uh, Jewish evangelism or chosen people ministries or any kind of Jewish ministry. If we just supported Jewish ministries with 1% of our church's income, that would be a tithe of the tithe, it would make a huge difference in the church's ability to reach Jewish people.
You know, Pastor Greg, you have studied this topic of Jewish evangelism, of messianic leadership. I can't help but think there are probably viewers watching this who might be accidentally replacement in their theology. They might have accidentally thought that all these promises that God has made for Israel and the Jewish people are now just the churches. And I wondered if you could take a few minutes and maybe describe why Israel is different from the church. Are their roles different? And is there still a place for Israel in today's landscape?
Well, replacement theology is basically the theology that says that the church has replaced Israel. And there's three views of that. There's the punitive view, which says that Israel only exists so God could punish her and show his wrath. And that's really that's the basis of the Holocaust and things like that. That's totally not Christian. The second view is what we would call economic supersessionism. Basically, in the economy of God, Israel has fulfilled her purpose. And really, that's really sets God up to look like a wicked person. Because what that paints God as, imagine a man who starts off in life without much, and he marries this woman, and she helps him, and he makes it. He's now rich, and he's now famous, and he's successful, and he decides one day to trade his wife in for a younger, prettier model. We would think that a man like that was a wicked man. But that is exactly what we make God out to be if we think that God has traded his wife in for the church. Instead, the church is special because she is grafted onto, that is connected with Israel. And Israel is like the bride, as it were, in the book of Hosea. And the Bible's clear on that. The Tanakh, the Jewish Bible is really clear on that God is faithful to his people Israel. No matter how they have behaved, he is faithful. And so, yes, he has a Mosaic and an Abrahamic covenant. They're both beautiful. One of them emphasizes or includes the idea of discipline, includes it, the Mosaic covenant. But the other covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, is this covenant of unconditional love. And when God wants to discipline Israel, he'll pull out that Mosaic covenant and discipline her. But when he wants to just love on her, he pulls out the Abrahamic covenant and he loves on her. So under the Mosaic covenant, he exiled Israel. He brought Israel back in 1948. He didn't bring Israel back because she was living in obedience to the Mosaic covenant. No, he brought her back because he is a faithful, loving, good God who loves his people with an unconditional covenant. And that is how we should treat Israel. I'm a husband. I love my wife. If you want to win my heart, say something kind about my wife. If you want to really cause me to think twice about you as a person, say something unkind about my wife. You know, I'll never forget it. She's my wife. I love her. And, you know, people constantly, they forget that Israel is the apple of God's eye. He loves her. You want to win the heart of God? Love on Israel. He loves them.
Pastor Greg, thank you for your passion. And certainly in your bio, you even say that one of your passions is teaching the Jewish roots of the New Testament. I would love for you to just give our viewers a sneak peek at some of God's heart and some of the Jewish roots that are in the New Testament.
Well, let's start with the end. We could go anywhere. We could start with Matthew, but let's go to Revelation. The book of Revelation ends in Revelation 21, where God says to John, he says, and I will show you the bride. Right? And so John sees the bride, and what he sees is the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, prepared as a bride. So he says, I'll show you the bride. Now, this is different from Ephesians. In Ephesians, God says that he says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. That's a metaphor. That's a simile. By definition, a simile is not a statement of fact. He says, husbands, love your wives the same way Christ loves the church. But the bride is actually Israel. And the church is grafted onto Israel. And so when God says to John, I will show you the bride, he sees the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. And what does he see? He sees a structure, if you will, that has 12 gates and 12 foundation stones. And the 12 foundation stones are all the names of the 12 apostles. They're all Jewish. And the foundation stones, we can fairly well assume they're at the bottom of the gates. But then there's also the names of the 12 tribes of Israel that are on the gates. Well, we can assume that those names would be over the gates, since the apostles are under the gates. So the names of the 12 tribes of Israel are eternally inscribed over the gates of the eternal Jerusalem. That blows replacement theology away. And so the way into the new heaven, the way into the new Jerusalem, like after the current heaven, after the current world and the new heavens and the new earth, the way into the eternal one means that you will walk into this place and you can look down and see the name of a Jew. You can look up and see the name of a Jew. Every person who enters, everyone who enters the New Jerusalem enters through Israel. There are no anti-Semites in heaven.
Wow, that is a powerful visual and a powerful truth. Pastor Greg, thank you for being with us today. Viewers, we want you to check out what Gateway Church is doing to love the Jewish people, and we also want you to check out the Gateway Center for Israel. And of course, look at our website at Alliance for the Peace of Jerusalem to find out more about the Jerusalem Alliance.